Hello and welcome to the first of 6 New York Forward Capacity Building webinars. My name is Stefan Lutter. I'm a revitalization specialist with New York Department of State. We're pleased to be joined today by Amanda Bearcroft, Program Director for Downtown Revitalization Initiative in New York Forward, and Sarah Crowell, Director of the Office of Planning, Development, and Community Infrastructure, as well as my colleagues, Pop Cisse and Rachel Bruce. New York's downtowns are the heart and soul of our communities. They reflect our history and are catalysts for social, economic, and cultural revitalization. Through Governor Hochul's launch of New York Forward, the success of DRI is being brought to smaller downtowns, kickstarting revitalization across every region of the state. With the first round of New York Forward underway, our communities are currently developing strategic investment plans that will outline the transformative impacts to come. The application for the second round of New York Forward has recently been announced with $100 million available in funding. Like the DRI, New York Forward communities will develop a strategic investment plan and compile catalytic projects that build toward a community vision for a revitalized downtown. As a reminder for those applying, here are important dates for this year's application. August 15th, the intent to apply will be due on August 18th. The link to the intent to apply can be found within the DRI New York Forward application guidebook. While it's not mandatory, communities can take advantage of one-on-one technical assistance by completing the intent to apply form. Forms submitted after this deadline do not guarantee technical assistance. Applications are due via the CFA portal for all regions except New York City by September 29th at 4 p.m. For New York City, applications must be emailed to your borough president office by September 8th at 4 p.m. Applications cannot and will not be accepted after the deadline, so please keep that in mind. These educational webinars that start today aim to help New York Forward communities understand the basics of downtown revitalization planning. Whether you intend to apply for New York Forward this year or are interested in learning where to start, these webinars will help communities build the capacity needed to take on important planning initiatives. Over the course of 6 webinars, you'll be better equipped to apply for New York Forward funding and indeed carry out the New York Forward program, should you be awarded. We'll cover strategic planning concepts like building a community inventory, public engagement, visioning and goal development, placemaking strategies, project identification and development, and plan implementation. Please note that these webinars were recorded last year and are currently on the DOS website, but they include irrelevant references to previous dates and times. The relevant and correct dates regarding these webinars and program deadlines are shown here and will be available on the DOS website as well. Once these reprised webinars are recorded, they'll be uploaded to the site to mitigate any date confusion. Please note that there's a recorded webinar dedicated to the DRI and New York Forward application process that has also been posted to the New York Forward Capacity webinar website. So if you want to specifically watch a webinar, there's a walkthrough of the application process that is available. During this webinar, please submit all questions as they rise into the chat box, and we will compile those and answer questions at the end of the video, which is in about 40 minutes time. All questions received from the 6 webinar series will be compiled into one FAQ and posted on the Capacity webinar website. So without further ado, I will share my screen. And play the video.
And welcome everybody. We appreciate you joining us. As Kisha said, my name is Jessica Basher. I'm at the Land Use Law Center at Pace Law, and I'm actually joined today by Kevin Dorka, a land use and economic consultant. And we're going to share a bit with you over the next this webinar and 5 more webinars, what we've learned working with communities throughout New York State on downtown revitalization. Today, what we're going to focus on is kind of in our webinar 1, the introduction and the community inventory. And really, in order to get started, it is best to really understand kind of what you've already done. What is your readiness? Where are you in kind of planning? Have you taken certain actions where that information might be? Because you don't need to do everything. You may have already, as a community, undertaken some of these tasks. So we're going to do a document and data inventory overview, and Kevin's going to walk you through that. After that's done, I'm going to go back to our capacity building webinar series and talk a little bit about what's to come next. So you have a sense of what you need to do, what you need to be ready to do, but then also how you're going to get those things done. So we're going to walk you through that at the end of the webinar today. And then after that, we'll have some time for Q&A. So you may notice in your toolbar, there is a chat function. If you click on that chat function, you can send messages to the presenters today. And you could be sending in your questions as we're going through. You don't have to wait till the end, but at the end as well, we'll have some time to answer those questions. We can also respond to some of those through the chat. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, and he's going to get us started with the inventory process. Kevin, you're on mute.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am that guy who's on mute. I'm very excited to be here and talk with you about revitalization planning. It's a topic that Jessica and I have worked on for many years together. And it's a topic that requires a certain amount of technical knowledge and expertise. But what I want to say to all of you just before we get started here is that the process of revitalization planning takes the entire community with a very broad variety of skill sets and backgrounds and interests within your community, and that you can undertake this process, the process of revitalization planning, even if you were a small community, even if you don't have a full-time planner, even if you don't have the resources right now to engage a planning consultant who can help you navigate through the technical intricacies of the analysis. There are ways that you can take shortcuts. There are ways that you can learn the material. There's ways that all of you, regardless of your backgrounds, can get involved in this process. So with this module and the subsequent ones, our aim here is really to empower you as communities to grab the reins of revitalization planning. Easier said than done, perhaps because of 2 reasons. One of them is that revitalization planning, by its nature, is an interdisciplinary process that touches upon everything. And so often, revitalization planning happens in a more ad hoc way. Someone has a great idea for a particular type of building on a site, and a lot of attention goes toward the realization of this building concept, but without relation to all other aspects of the community, without relation to the infrastructure, without relation to other types of social services that are needed. And so here's where revitalization planning as a cohesive, integrated process that touches upon a variety of topics, whether they're demographics or the yearnings and needs of the community, the patterns of land use, transportation conditions, the state of environmental assets and their performance, the housing inventory, and the economic and fiscal position. All of these different topics relate to revitalization planning, and ideally they happen concurrently. So what I'm going to do today is walk you through each of these different topics and give you a window into the types of information that you're going to want to collect under these topics. Now, let me describe to you why, more specifically, we would go through this process. Okay, first of all, we need to establish an understanding of where you are as a community today. What are your baseline conditions? What's working? What's not, right? And you also want to understand where your opportunities rest. Where are the sites that are appropriate for development? What are your human resources? What is your business community like? How might they be assets as well? And then what are your constraints? What's holding you back? Maybe it's the transportation network. Maybe it's environmentally sensitive areas. Maybe it's, the regional economy. How does the community perceive their needs that are being fulfilled and not fulfilled? Where are their service gaps, right? All of this is going to get documented as part of your inventory process. Also, the information gets organized. A lot of times this information is there, but it's kind of scattered, and it's very difficult to grab one document and say, this is where everything is, right? And then the second, related to the organization of the information that will come out of the inventory, hopefully through a very clear summation, not an especially long one, but one that is at least detailed enough to understand what's happening, is that information gets distributed to all of the stakeholders, to your residents, to your property owners, to your merchants, to everyone within your community. And this really responds to, a very big challenge in revitalization planning. Besides the fact that it's multidisciplinary, change is sometimes uncomfortable, even when a community has a lot of challenges. There's fears of change. There are attachments to the way a community can be. There may be suspicion about change. And when you distribute the information in a cohesive, in a clear, in an objective, in a professional manner, that's not tied to one property owner, to one developer's vision, but that is really inclusive and addressing everyone in that community and touching upon all topics, you have the potential for activating a wider breadth of stakeholders who are interested and vested in revitalization planning. This process will also help you determine how ready you are for taking on a revitalization plan. There's a lot of work involved in moving forward with a revitalization plan. And when you inventory what you've already got, your documents and your data, it lets you know, am I ready to go forward in applying for a grant, whether it's from New York State or from another source? Or are there other pieces of the puzzle that even before I embark upon a formal revitalization plan that I better do first? And I'm going to talk more about that as we get deeper. And lastly, this inventory, it's just the process of going through it and seeing which documents and data you've got. It's going to reveal for you a scope of action for your community. What is it that should be prioritized? Who should lead the process of revitalization planning? Who should help? How do you communicate? All of that's going to come out in a scope of action from this. Let me tell you what's not included within this particular stage of the process with the document and data inventory. You are not at this stage of the process undertaking original data analysis. You're not crunching numbers. You're not revising a zoning code. You're not doing a deep dive investigation on environmental conditions and performances. You're not doing a fiscal analysis. You're just seeing what is it that you have available immediately to you, right, in terms of pre-existing documents. Think of the stage a bit like going into the kitchen and opening the fridge to seeing what you've got. You're hungry. You want to eat something. You don't have recipes. You don't know yet. No, you don't know yet how to cook. You just want to know what you've got, what you might need to go to the store and get more of, right? That's where we are right in this moment here. We're just opening the fridge. We're just seeing what we've got available to us. And through the future webinars, we're going to actually show you what to do with the ingredients you've got. And then for the ingredients you don't have, how do you get them? And then how do you pull all of that together to create a coherent, integrated, implementable revitalization plan? So let's go through now some of the things we're going to be looking for to see if they're in your house. The demographic composition of your community. You want to start by knowing who is living and who is working in your community. You could do it as a snapshot in time. You could look to see, where we are right now in July 2022. what your community's composition is in terms of the numbers, of residents that you have. But you might also want to look at this comparatively over time and space. How have you been growing in your community? How has your growth compared to other communities that are near you? How does it compare to the county in which you reside? And then move more deeply into understanding the subpopulations in your community. Look at what the growth has been like for folks, who identify with different racial groups or who identify with different age categories. How has your senior population changed? Have they grown? Are they moving into different neighborhoods? Are there more households with children? Are there less households with children? What is the gender split? What is the single parent split in your community? And look at how these different groups are having different socioeconomic experiences in terms of their income levels or in terms of their education levels. Where do you get this information? Well, if you have a recently adopted comprehensive plan, you might have that information from a couple years ago available to you in the existing conditions chapter. If you've produced a consolidated plan as part of your compliance for CDBG monies, or perhaps as part of other grant programs, you might have some data there. You also might be able to just quickly look at a software tool called Policy Map, which we will cover in a future webinar on the community needs assessment, and generate very quickly a demographic profile of your community. And then there's also a deeper dive into the US Census, which we're also going to be covering in our future webinar on the community needs assessment. Community input. So this is intuitive to all of you, that revitalization planning has to be linked inextricably, closely, continuously with the needs and wants of your community. However, it would probably not be appropriate at this stage early in the game for you to immediately move into visioning sessions or brand new community engagement workshops without first seeing what you actually have already, right? Because you may already have some records of engagement from outreach events, maybe related to the comprehensive plan. Your mayors may have put out brief community surveys asking for residents to weigh in on a particular issue. Nonprofit organizations in your community, they may have information from their constituents, from their clients. They may have conducted surveys, or they may have had workshops or focus groups or meetings. You want those notes. So I say start with what you've got. See what people have been saying. There's other sources too. You can look at the minutes from legislative board meetings or from committees. And I do that myself when I start working in a community. I want to see, what people are saying when they come and talk and speak and testify at meetings. Of course, you're not capturing a wide swath of the community there, right? So that's limited. And you may also want to take a look at what the direct communications have been from your residents. Like perhaps they've sent letters to the mayor or sent letters to your legislative representatives. Maybe they've published op-ed pieces in local newspapers. So gather all of that information as your first baseline on community input. Okay, so for land uses, so much of revitalization depends on the existing land uses within your community. The land use map, the existing land use map, maybe, I'm not sure why someone's at my door. The existing land use map is something that some communities may have, but not all communities may have it. And the reality is that the counties may be able to generate this map for you, or your building departments may be able to generate this map for you, but it's really important. So if you look around and you find that you don't have a record of what your existing land uses are, make a note of it. You'll get to it eventually. It will help you understand where existing residential uses are, where existing commercial uses are, how your community is currently set up in terms of density levels. So an important piece, Not every community has it. Zoning map. Most communities will have this, right? You'll have, a record of your existing regulations. You'll have a map of what zoning codes are in place in certain areas. The trick is that this document, the zoning map and your zoning code may not necessarily be updated. So you want to look at the year of the zoning map and the regulations. You want to determine whether or not it's accurate. Maybe your community has adopted zoning map changes and legislative decisions, but they actually haven't updated the map. Or maybe there have been introductions of new types of zoning, shifts to form-based codes, but that hasn't yet been reflected either within the zoning code or the map. And you may, if you do have an existing land use map, it's a worthwhile exercise to take a look at what the zoning code is telling you that you can build and what your existing land uses are currently. So this is an important piece as a first step in revitalization planning. See if you've got it. It should be on your website. It might be on the eCode site. It might be something that your county planning departments can help you generate too, if it has been outdated or if for whatever reason you don't have access to it. One of the hardest pieces of data in the land use realm to access is the location and the number of vacant properties. So in the US Census, there is vacant property data, but that vacant property data for residential uses is not likely to be fully accurate. A lot of times we don't really know which buildings are vacant, and we may not know which buildings are distressed. They may be occupied, but they may be distressed, or they may be in a state of tax foreclosure. You can work with your building department folks, and they may be able through their property management systems to generate a record of vacant properties like we were able to do in the city of Newburgh, from which this map you're looking at shows the location of vacant properties. In the case of Newburgh, they have a vacant property registry where the owners of vacant properties are required to report the existence of a property being vacant. But if you don't have this, okay, we'll work on this later on how you can begin a process of inventorying the location and magnitude of vacancy issues, as well as the degree to which your buildings might be in a state of some type of distress, whether it's a physical distress or an economic distress. Area plans. Area plans are focused visions of a particular part of your community. Look into your archives, go back in time. Even area plans from the 60s and 70s are going to be helpful to you. Very likely they were crafted for your downtown. And even if they're old, you can learn a lot from them. You can learn what ideas had been considered in the past, and maybe why some of those ideas never materialized. They may be labeled as downtown or neighborhood plans. They might be part of a local waterfront revitalization plan, or they might be buried within an old comprehensive plan. They might not be public documents. They might be documents that were generated by a developer who had a vision for developing a series of parcels closely connected to each other in the downtown, and they are filled with information that may still be relevant to your revitalization planning effort. So look for the documents. And as I said, the older ones are still relevant too. Some of you are, may have been working in your communities for decades, and some of you might be newer. And looking at those older plans, they also can help you understand a bit too of the infrastructural evolution of your community, as well as the real property evolution too, how buildings came to change over time in relation to the existing transportation and sewer and water networks. And then lastly, in land use, inventory your policy frameworks. Now, the obvious place to look for this might be your comprehensive plan, because typically, and this is just an example of the Ardsley comprehensive plan and the ones that relate to land use, typically the comprehensive plan is going to include a range of land use policies, zoning changes, public realm improvements, policies that help promote improved quality of life, or expand or diversify housing supply, or facilitate the preservation of historic buildings, or target certain areas for commercial development. So that's a valuable tool if you've got a comprehensive plan. You also may have the area plans, as I mentioned, and then sometimes there are development plans from counties where they may offer some language that is specific to what the vision is for the future of your community. And you'll want to take a look at that. Oftentimes that is not very specific, but if your community has been designated as a growth hub, for example, you'll want to know how it's been framed within that county plan. And lastly, sometimes there's advocacy organizations where they've put forward policy frameworks, which obviously are non-governmental and they're aspirational, but still they may be packed with some good ideas. Sometimes sustainable development organizations will generate blueprints of how a particular region should grow. And you'll want to look and see if your community is included with that blueprint and if there's some ideas that are worth cataloging too. Well, let's move on to transportation. So where your community is situated in the state has profound implications on your opportunities for revitalization. And so you want to know what your geographic assets are, and also where you might, be experiencing some challenges in terms of the existing transportation network, whether or not there's limited regional highway access, or whether or not you are far from a regional rail network that makes it difficult for folks of either mode of transportation to access job centers, or to attract labor to jobs and businesses that are located within your community. It's easy enough to go on Google and get a map of your road network. If your community, such as Westchester County, has an interactive GIS hub, you can easily generate maps that show the network, that show the rail lines, that show the bus lines. So that's very handy. A little bit more elusive is gathering information on the internal access network. Of course, you can easily get a map of your local roads, but are you going to have information about the pedestrian and the bike network, or the amount of parking you have in your community? You'll talk with your public works folks and you'll see what you've got. And then as you get further along in the process, you might have to do some original data collection to get a sense of how your pedestrian and bike network is arranged. Then there's the performance of that network, right? So there's the infrastructure, which road, which sidewalk, which bike lane, which rail line takes you where. And then there's how that infrastructure is performing. And you're going to want to find out if you've got some good traffic volume data, or accident data, or data on commuting patterns, which is described in this slide here, showing the number of workers that come into a community to work, the number of residents who leave that community to work elsewhere, the number of folks who stay in that community, who live and work inside their place of residence. And that's great information to know. It lets you know how your community is functioning as an economic unit, what its relation is to the surrounding areas. For federal and state highway information, you can grab some information from the New York State DOT traffic viewer. You might have some local traffic studies. A lot of smaller communities may not have that. Your police departments, they may have some good information on traffic accidents. A backdoor that I like to use for getting traffic information are environmental impact statements. Maybe someone has proposed a project, gone through an EIS process, and they've gathered some great information on traffic volumes. And then there's information too, especially on commuting patterns, that's available through the US Census, and we'll be covering that too in the community needs assessment module. Capital improvement plans. They come in all shapes and sizes. I'm showing you here a graphic of a conceptual complete streets plan for Rochester's Loop East, but capital improvement plans can be as small as resurfacing the pavement of a road segment. And they can be as ambitious as major state-led highway projects or roadway redesign projects or infrastructure extensions of rail transit. So you're going to want to look broadly at all sources here, including your local and your county and your state transportation plans to get a handle on what has been proposed. I often will start with the local budget and I will try and see what sort of capital transportation improvements have been listed in that budget. There might not be a lot of description there. There might just be 4 or 5 words describing proposal for change of this intersection or widening of this road. And that's okay, because at this stage, you're just cataloging. You want to know what are all of the different types of transportation improvements. And then later on, you'll use those transportation improvements to do a deeper analysis of how they are affecting access and circulation in the area you've designated for revitalization. Let's move on to environmental assets. So even if your zoning code and your comprehensive plan and your land use policies suggest that there's a site that maybe currently houses a cluster of single family homes and legally it could be rebuilt as a mixed use development project with retail on the bottom and rental units above it, the environmental context might not be appropriate for that type of development vision. And you really want to know what your critical environmental areas are. Where are there wetlands? Where are there steep slopes? Where are there watersheds and flood zones, especially if you're in a coastal area, but not only, because inland areas have flooded too. And one way of gathering this information would be to marshal data that's available at the state and federal level, get a gathering flood information from FEMA, for example. But I would suggest that if you have a county, such as Suffolk County in Long Island, that has a GIS viewer that can instantly generate a map that shows you the locations of your environmental assets and their extent, start with that. If you need more information later, you'll grab it later. If you don't have a county that has got a GIS viewer, but they do have GIS files, well, then it might be helpful to tap a GIS expert to generate some mapping for you. But start to see what might already be available to you, either from the county or from their GIS viewer. Conditions, how the environment is performing in terms of water quality or air quality or impairments of native habitat or flooding. Again, there's information, state and federal sources that we're going to go through during the community needs assessment process. But sometimes this information has already been analyzed by an environmental advocacy organization, such as this image I'm showing you here, showing water quality as represented by Save the Sounds, South Health Explorer. So this, can be a shortcut for you. Start here, look and see if you've got a nonprofit organization that has already created some type of report card or slogged through that data from the federal state level and put that in your archive as a starting point. And then environmental policies. I have to say, this is probably the hardest part that comes in the document and data inventory, because it could appear in lots of different sources and they may conflict with each other. So you might find what your community's policies are in environment in a comprehensive plan that hasn't been updated since the 1960s. Then you may also in that community have a local waterfront revitalization plan that is completed but actually has not yet been certified, right? So there's an outline, a blueprint of policies, but they haven't yet been formally adopted. You may have environmental committees in your community and they may have wonderful memorandums or slide decks that show what they think the community's environmental policies should be. Or you might have advocacy organizations that have generated best practices on policies that are relevant to your community. So grab all of it, grab it, and understand that if we do our jobs correctly, when we get to the end of this revitalization planning process, there'll be an opportunity to integrate all of these policies and make sure that they are up to date, non-conflicting, and integrated, ideally in your comprehensive plan. But in the interim, just know what's there, know what you've got. Housing. So housing is going to be a key part of every revitalization planning effort. Housing is as much a community need as it is a economic development activity, as much as it is a determinant of public health outcomes, of educational access. And here's an area where you really are going to need rich, updated data sets that show you what is the existing supply of housing, your home ownership rates, how the market has been affecting the cost of housing, the cost burden of housing, its conditions. Ideally, your community has done some type of housing needs assessment. I'm showing you here a tabular summary of housing cost burdens from the village of Ossining, which had done precisely that, the housing needs assessment, but not every community has done that. So you might have to do some original analysis. You may be able to draw some housing information from your building departments or from county housing studies or from policy map, as I mentioned. But here is an area where you see what you've got, and then you may have to do some original analysis with the census, and we'll be showing you how to navigate that information to generate the types of data sets you'll need to embark upon revitalization planning. Okay, the housing policy framework, like the environmental framework, this is a really critical part of understanding what the community's current commitments and aspirations are for affecting housing supply and affordability, and knowing the regulatory framework's important. Unlike the environmental policies, the housing policies are more likely in fewer areas and easier to digest. You'll probably see them within the comprehensive plan, and they may be spelled out, but generally pretty straightforward within zoning regulations, which may include the inclusionary housing policies. It can't hurt for you to also inventory fair housing laws at the local and county and state and federal level. But I would say that a lot of that information is already quickly summarized, has already been summarized, and so you won't have a lot of work in that area. The most important piece here is to really check and see whether or not the housing policies, as they are inscribed within your comprehensive plan, are truly reflective of current housing conditions, or if a lot has changed since they were updated and that there may be some more work to do. A final document you may want to look at are court documents or settlement agreements, and understand what the dictates are from those documents in terms of what types of housing need to be built within your community. We shift now to the economics section of the inventory. First of all, you're going to want to collect information that describes the community's base in terms of the economic sectors that are employing residents. This is really easy to get at by using US Census on the map, LEHD data. And not only does it give you great data showing you the sectors that are employing residents in a particular community, but it also gives you the data showing you what types of jobs are in your community. So you really kind of get a sense there, about like what jobs your residents are holding, and then also what jobs your workers who are coming into your community are filling, and how those workers are also part of your community too, as well. Even though they may not be living there, they are central to key sectors of your economy. Market data shows you what has been the activity in terms of sales transactions for all types of land uses, whether they're residential or industrial or commercial, what the availability of certain types of commercial uses such as office space are, what are the asking rents, how long it takes before a property is put on the market and it is leased or purchased. For smaller communities, it can be really difficult to grab this information. Oftentimes, you can get good information from brokerage houses, which I like to get for larger communities, such as this one here I'm depicting from Newmark Real Estate Advisory, because it's often very up to date, like from the last quarter, whereas if you look at policy documents, that information invariably is outdated. If you're in a smaller community, you may be able to tap some of the real estate brokers for information, and they might be able to help you. They may be able to generate some reports for you, or they may be able to just give you some anecdotal information. But start by seeing if you've got a ready-made brokerage report that you can at least begin to see how the market is currently performing, how prices have been changing over the last couple of years. Then there's the plans and the policies for economics, which you should also inventory. You might find them in your comprehensive plan. You might, some communities such as Tarrytown have generated local economic development strategies. A lot of smaller communities have not done that, but they may have a white paper that their economic development committee has generated, and that's invaluable to have. It gives you a window into the way other folks have been thinking about revitalization opportunities. And then there are county economic development policy frameworks too. And sometimes those frameworks can be very locally specific. They may have an appendix, for example, that dives in deeper into local communities. They may be more general and not address your community, but I would say to still review those documents because they'll give you an insight of the broader regional economic picture. They're also going to reveal to you who's working at a higher scale of economic development, and those individuals may very likely want to be your partners on local economic development as well. So look at all of those sources and put them into your archive. And then lastly, I strongly suggest that if you have a fiscal impact analysis that was generated in your community, whether it was one that maybe you as a locality undertook to evaluate the tax revenue outcomes from a proposed rezoning, or if it was a local developer or an outside developer who proposed a project and they did a fiscal impact analysis as part of the approval process to show how the project will perform and a net fiscal outcome in terms of the amount of revenue that it will generate in relation to the amount of costs it will create for the locality or for the county or for the school district. It's not often thought of as being a document you need to look at the beginning of your revitalization planning process. And not every community has one, but I encourage you, if you do have one, to look at it really carefully. Because embedded within that fiscal impact analysis, whether it's been done for a rezoning or for a development project, there will be all sorts of information that will be useful to you. You will see summaries from your annual financial statements or projections from your budget. You'll see data that has been collected from the assessor on different types of property and how they're taxed and how much revenue they have generated. You're going to see a summary of economic development policies within that fiscal impact analysis. So there's other documents, you can look at, the original annual budgets and financial statements, and you can look at the capital plans if they exist, or grant reports. All of those are good documents to also have in your library. But if you've got a fiscal impact analysis, a lot of the work will have been done for you, especially if it's a robust fiscal impact analysis and a recent one. So I believe that concludes all of the data, and I've probably completely overwhelmed you. And in addition to all of the data points I've mentioned, I imagine many of you have probably been thinking about, but wait, there's more. I also have found tremendous utility in this data source and this document. And there's other topics here, recreation.
All right, I'm going to share this schedule again. Hold on, folks. So, as mentioned earlier, we have more webinars that will be available in this series. There was obviously a lot of information presented there, and of course, the video and the remaining videos and slides will be posted online and available for your viewing in case you want to revisit anything that was discussed today. The link for that is in the chat, as well as the August 16th live application walkthrough for New York Forward. That link is also in the chat. There will be a recorded version of the application walkthrough available on the website as well. A reminder to put any questions you might have in the chat related to what was discussed today or anything New York Forward. And just to quickly give you an overview of the remaining webinars in this series, that will provide some context on what was discussed today. On August 15th, we have a visioning, goal setting, and outreach webinar that will outline a clear process for actively engaging local residents in participatory and interactive visioning exercises to build community consensus and support for long-term goals. We'll learn how to leverage existing community networks and stakeholder groups to maximize participation through in-person events, virtual meetings, surveys, and more. On August 17th, we have a community needs assessment webinar. Many of our smaller communities lack dedicated planning staff with a range of technical skills typically required for a community needs assessment. This webinar will guide participants through shortcuts in the technical assessment process and demonstrate easy to use online tools in statistical analysis, mapping, and real estate market research so that users can create a robust data-driven profile of a community's assets and challenges. On August 22nd, we have a placemaking strategies and early project identification webinar. This webinar shows participants how to take data from the visioning process and combine it with findings from the community needs assessment to formulate a coherent placemaking strategy and generate development interest. We'll show communities how to harness their fullest economic potential and build momentum. On August 24th, we have a project development webinar that will help participants understand how to transform their placemaking concepts into a synergistic set of transformative goals. Key issues addressed include defining a project's purpose and goals, relating project goals to community needs assessment, preparing conceptual designs, and developing a feasible project implementation plan. And then on August 29th, we have implementation of a revitalization plan. The webinar focuses on strategies for implementing a revitalization plan and avoiding project delays or cancellations. Key topics will include organizing implementation partners, amending the comprehensive plan and zoning code, shepherding a project through approval processes, and leveraging success for further revitalization initiatives. Together, these give participants a broad background knowledge to begin a cohesive and effective process towards revitalization. Again, informative whether you are planning to become a New York Forward community or in general, great planning knowledge for any community to have. If there's any questions, please put them in the chat now. A reminder that the intent to apply is August 18th, and the applications for everyone but New York City are due via the CFA portal by September 29th, September 8th for New York City to the Borough President's Office via email. I have a private question here. Someone has submitted an intent to apply but haven't been contacted by anyone. Should they expect to be contacted or to receive a confirmation email that outlines how to use the technical support?
Thanks, Stefan. So if you have submitted an intent to apply form into our Microsoft form, we have received all of those. You should be hearing from our consultant starting by the end of this week. They're planning to start setting up emails and call outs to set up meetings with everyone. So don't fear, we have that list that everyone who has already applied. Also, if you haven't applied yet and would like that one-on-one technical assistance that Stefan was discussing, please fill out the Microsoft form, and our consultant will be in contact with you on next steps and setting up those meetings so you're prepared for final submission on September 29th by 4 p.m.
Last call for any questions. If we intend to apply at some point, but possibly not this year, should they fill out the intent to apply form?
You can always fill out the intent to apply form to start the process of receiving more information. And if you decide ultimately not to apply, you'll at least have a foot in the door for what the next steps are. We also will have all of these tools and webinars that will live on our website for even in between cycles that will be available for people to review to get that step up where if you aren't ready this year, that you can review in the upcoming year to get your best foot forward and set that foundation.
Right. Well, thank you everyone for attending today. We hope to see you at the next webinar in this series, and we look forward to receiving your New York Forward application.